All right, tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Akshita Iyer, and I'm the founder and CEO of Ohm.
Well, Akshita, it's great to reconnect with you. I was just thinking back to when we first connected. I think it was 2016 when you came to the Smart Kitchen Summit, and you guys were part of the Startup Showcase, one of the very first ones. And at the time, the company was called Enerve, and
Yep.
you guys were doing this smart stove knob, and it was a very nascent market. It was you guys, and I think there's a company called Meld that never actually brought it to market. They got acquired by Heston, but it's been a long time. Those early days to now, it's been a lot of work. Tell us a little bit about how it's gone.
Yeah, Mike, it has been a long journey, but very rewarding. As you know, I started the company just because I had a very um, personal experience with my mom. She was diagnosed with Parkinson's right when I graduated from college and didn't really know what that meant. So my parents were getting older. And then a few years later, she left the stove on one too many times and started a kitchen fire. And so that really got me thinking about the smart home. Nest had just been acquired. There was, Ring was on the rise, all these smart devices that were making the home more secure and safe. And then I looked at the kitchen and, unfortunately, as you know, I mean, your appliances last a really long time, right? 10, 15, 20 years. And so the idea was if we can retrofit, most other devices in our homes, what if we could do that for your most used cooking appliance, which is your stove, and do it in a way that's intuitive and affordable so that we could actually solve for the number one cause of house fires, which was exactly what my mom did, right? Leaving the stove on by
Yeah,
accident.
yeah,
And at the time we were at the Smart Kitchen Summit, I mean, it really was an idea. I think we had like a point 0.5, version of the
yeah.
knob. It just, kind of
3D
very, very,
printed, maybe.
it was 3D printed for quite a few quite a few years. But when I started, and maybe the blessing in disguise was, how hard could this be? Right? I'm a smart device can't be that
Yeah, you don't know
complicated.
anything when you
More about
start.
it, right? And so, we didn't realize the complexity of building a pretty much new technology that could not only, rotate and control a burner, but then you've got an app, right? And you've got an entire
Yeah,
customer
yeah,
experience that spans the physical and then the digital, right? So app, firmware, software, backend. And so, for the first couple years, as you may know, it was a bootstrap thing, right? Like we were just kind of doing this on the side and thought best case scenario, maybe,
it was a side hustle. It was a
yeah, it was
side
a side
hustle.
hustle. And best case scenario, maybe my mom got a prototype. And then, first thing we did was file IP so that in the long term, maybe we could license it. But then we ended up on Shark Tank and heard from
And
thousands of people.
yeah, and that time that was around, was that 2018, 2019? When was that?
2018. Yeah.
Okay, and you guys launched your Kickstarter, I think, in 2017, and I was just checking in on that, and it's amazing that you guys delivered in 2021, and you guys are still responding to people's responses on there. So that's a long journey, but congrats to you guys. Kudos to actually still staying on top of that.
Yeah. I mean, our Kickstarter backers were like, early
Super
supporters.
early,
And
yeah,
and like to what I said at the time, we didn't really fully appreciate how challenging this would be, but in a good way, right? Technology like this had never been commercialized, even though there were some others that had tried. And, the reason we still keep up with them is because one, with the Gen 1 product that you mentioned, we launched, a couple years ago, we had to make some engineering sacrifices. I mean, you just can't get everything you want in your first generation. Otherwise, it'll take you years. And so, with this Gen 1, it's bigger.
yeah,
We had a lot of compatibility constraints. So we couldn't work on stove tops where the knobs are
yeah.
smaller and closer together. And that's where our Kickstarter, we couldn't deliver to some of our Kickstarter backers because not all of them had ranges that were compatible. And so we're now taking that opportunity with Gen 2 to continue to fulfill to, those customers even years later.
And to explain to people who are listening and who may not be familiar with the product, it's essentially a knob, a smart knob that goes on, retrofits onto existing burners, stoves, and that allows a couple things. One, like you said, you're in a scenario where it's an aging in place, as an elderly person where maybe they are forgetful, they wander away. There's this safety net, and that kind of turns it off, right? It will essentially turn off. And then also there's the ability to potentially remotely control with your app.
Correct. So very simple in the sense of you just replace your existing stove knob and we're not changing anything about your stove. So you push, you turn, the way that you use your stove remains exactly the same. The only difference, like you said, is that our device has a built-in custom motor, it has position sensors, and then it connects to Wi-Fi. So every time you turn the burner on, we know which burner you're using, how long you're using it for, what time of day you're using it, and then we do have that motor in there so we can proactively and automatically adjust the temperature, or more importantly, actually turn it off if you leave it on by accident. And so, like you said, yeah, you can remotely control if you leave the house and you have that moment of panic, just like you check your security camera or your garage door, you can check your stove, make sure it's off. Really, really underscoring safety first and being proactive instead of reactive. What we're trying to do is actually prevent any hazards from starting in the first place.
So just to get a little bit under the hood on the technology and how this works.
Yeah. So, I mean, you'll be able to see this, but we have this knob bottom and then a knob top. So the knob
Yep.
bottom goes over the stove shaft. So you take your knob off,
Still
you have a
shut.
shaft that comes out, it slides right in, you just tighten down. So then it becomes secure. And then the knob top has all the electronics. And so once you tighten that down, we have a calibration process in our app that will actually tell the knob where your off, low, medium, high settings are. If you have a dual zone burner, you can do that too, because it's really important that the knob, the app, both know where your burner settings are so that it can rotate appropriately. So once you get all that set up, yeah, it's very simple. I mean, once you turn it on, that motor can engage with the shaft and actually rotate it like you would manually, but it does it on its own.
And I'm guessing the majority of the people that are buying these are for natural gas installations. Or are they also doing it for kind of old school electric as well?
It's gas, electric. We can even work on induction cooktops that have knobs. So a lot
Yep.
of them are coming out with knobs now. And so, uh, you know, the I think the misunderstanding or the assumption is that most cooking fires start from gas ranges. It's actually not true.
Hmm.
It's pretty split between gas and electric. You do
Hmm.
have, a
And old school electric, not necessarily induction, though, I would imagine.
correct, right.
Right,
Also,
right, right.
so we can work on induction if you have knobs to control, but not the
Yep, yep.
digital ones. Um, but yeah, I mean, the you do have an open flame with a gas range, which, has other safety ramifications. But the reality is that these cooking hazards and these cooking fires start from excess heat. And that
Hmm.
can happen on an electric range too. So we actually work on both. And when you look at our customer base, we've got electric and gas pretty much split across the board. So
Yep.
it's not just one or the other.
I've written about this, and it's been a little bit of a while, but in the stories I've written about why this type of technology makes sense in the kitchen, I think the stats underlie this, that the number one cause of home fires is in the kitchen. And the bulk of those, the majority of those, I think are largely older people who are kind of aging in place and they're older and it's just, they're just forgetful. They may wander away. And so is that kind of, that's what the stats largely say, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, older adults are 2.5 times more likely to die in a cooking related fire than the rest of the population. To what you just said, is you've got disabilities, right? Motor challenges, like my mom with Parkinson's. You have, cognitive decline, early stage Alzheimer's, dementia, and cooking is one of the first things to be affected because it's an activity of daily living. And like you also said, number one cause of house fires is still coming from the stove. And so, there have been and there are other solutions that try to mitigate for this. And kitchen fires, kitchen safety is not a new problem, right? People have been trying to solve for this for a long time. The way that we've approached it is, how do you create something that's super intuitive and affordable, minimal customer education, so that you can just kind of plug and play and fit seamlessly into the background of what someone does every day. And when you look at the older adult population, even more important, where you're not changing what they do every day, right? They're used to cooking the way that they have been the last 50
Mhm.
plus years. And so this has actually been the least techy product, but it has so much technology in it that just sits under the surface and just is there when you need it, like a safety net.
Yeah, I think there's a few others that I've seen, kind of automatic shut off valves. I think at CES this year there was some technology that had a camera over the top of the oven, and oh, by the way, they've left, and so let's shut things off. And so this, like you said, is cheaper. I think it's $129, right? So that's a pretty low entry point, and it's self installable. You don't have to get a technician involved.
Yep. Yeah, you don't have to pull out your stove. I mean, some of the automatic shut off devices out there, you have to remove your stove, you have to plug, it into the power. outlet, and then you have others that just detect, high levels of heat and sound an alarm. And so, again, it's really about the proactive nature of, can we do something and act for you in the moment in a way that is not obtrusive, right? So this is just turning a burner off. You want to turn it back on, you just push and turn it back on. And I do want to emphasize that we do not allow remote turn on. You have to push and turn. So there is no scenario where someone remotely could turn a burner on. We actually don't allow for that mechanically. And in our app, you can't do that either. But once you do turn that on, it kind of runs itself.
You don't allow for remote turn on, you allow for turn off. And I imagine that part of what ultimately the UL standard 858, which I think you're on the steering committee on, is around that type of scenario, right?
Right. So UL is a work in progress, as you know, right? I mean, as new technologies come out, new proposals are submitted to update these standards. It happened with ovens and sous vide devices, and so we are now really working on how do we update 858 to allow for automation in a safe way. And so, what is crucial for 858 as it's written today is that two-step on consent from the user, right? You're still pushing and turning so that as a consumer, you're turning it on, and then we can take over. And we are actually in the process of getting certification so that we can, really get that stamp of approval from the industry that we can build technology like this that actually offers, the much needed feature set that consumers need without putting anyone at risk, right? Because I think the biggest thing you all is worried about is, what if someone uses this to cook while they're not home, right? They leave it on. They're like, I'm going to walk out of the door and I'm going to cook for my phone. We don't want that. And so we do have some safeguards in there as well. But yeah, UL is an interesting journey, but it's really the way that the industry needs to move forward.
And to their credit, they always default to being fairly conservative because it's all about safety, right? And so making sure that is number one priority. I mean, I know that some of the argument for some of these devices in the past that I've heard is ultimately this could be something that could maybe even be underwritten by insurance providers. Have you had any conversations with insurance providers where this could be something you say, hey, this could make the home safer? It could potentially prevent home fires?
Oh yeah, I mean, ultimately that's the golden goose here, right? Can you incentivize adoption through discounts on your property insurance, just like you do with, your security systems or your Nest thermostat? And we have had many conversations with insurance companies. As you can probably attest to, the insurance industry is no different from any other, where it
Yeah.
takes a while, right? And it takes a lot of adoption and data to actually show that you are decreasing the risk of a cooking related fire. So we're still in relatively early stage company. And so where I've tried to be a little creative as to how we get insurance to move is actually through, senior living communities that we're working with, where you have a more vulnerable population. There's clearly, safety concerns. And so what we're doing is not only installing this hardware as a risk mitigator, but also capturing data every day from the knob. So when is the resident using the knob? How often are they using their burner? What time of day? And importantly, we collect all this auto shut off information. So most of these communities have incident data from before, right? We had X number of cooking hazards, or we had a kitchen fire, or someone left the gas on and gas was spewing. And we're giving this data to these senior living companies or senior living communities in a way where they can actually take this to their insurance broker and say, hey, look, I've installed this. This is what the data looked like before. These are the number of auto shutoffs we've captured in the last 30 days, 60 days. And then for them to kind of move the needle as a customer of an insurance company to get that discount. And I think the more case studies like that we have, the more we can move the industry forward. It's really hard to do as a startup without without those case studies there.
I always like to hear, and I collect Shark Tank stories because I have
Yeah.
so many people on this podcast that have gone through Shark Tank, but I've never heard your particular Shark Tank story. So first of all, did you get an offer? I can't remember if you did or not.
We did. Shark Tank was quite the experience. We did get an offer from Robert, and to be honest, it wasn't a bad offer for where we were, having kind of just started and barely, had a functioning prototype. But we didn't end up taking it, and I'm glad we didn't, because this was still a side hustle. at the time.
Yep.
And, we hadn't really raised any money and we didn't have a team of engineers. And if we had taken that money, it would have just gone down the drain because I hadn't really gone through the process of figuring out how you build a company, how you bring on the right team members, how you look at a product roadmap, and obviously all the complexities that ended up coming with actually launching this years later. And so I'm glad we didn't take it. People ask all the time, like, didn't you want $800,000? And I'm like, I would always love $800,000, but it was a blessing in disguise because then I spent the next couple of years going out to the Bay Area, finding the right investors who actually understood what it would take to commercialize a product like this, and then also finding the right team. I mean, I talk about, the story all the time, but really, the people who made it a reality were people much smarter than me who had been building smart devices for a long time. A lot of them come from the appliance industry. And we were, because of them, we were actually able to not only launch a Gen 1, but also a Gen 2.
And so you guys have your product out. It's the
Mhm.
Gen 2. It's $129. And we could go buy this today on your website. Can we buy it at retail? Where is it available?
So you can buy it on our website right now. We are, in the next, 6 months to a year, looking at expanding our distribution channels, potentially retail, Amazon. But, right now we have enough orders to fulfill on our website. So we're starting there. And we also really prioritize the customer experience. So every time we ship an own pack, we offer a customer installation call. I'm responding to most of our customer support emails because we want to hear from customers and understand where we can make that experience better. And I feel like we can have much better control on that when we're just selling ourselves. And then I think once we get to a certain point, expanding elsewhere makes sense. But right now, just our site.
And you guys do sell multi-packs? I know that I saw you could buy multiple. What is this typical purchase configuration? Is it usually one? Maybe if some people buy multiples?
Yeah, most people buy a full set depending on how many burners you're
Okay.
saving. So typically
Okay.
that's 4 or 5, maybe
Okay.
6. But we do offer a one, you can do 1, 2, and then you can do 4, 5, 6. The reason we still do that is what we saw with Gen 1 was typically our younger generation customer just wants to try it, right? I only use 1 or 2 burners the most. Let me try this out. And we really want to lower that threshold so that we can get into the kitchen. Let's really prove our value to you. And what we typically see is that people do come back and they want their stove to look uniform, so they end up buying the rest. But we do offer it in a pack just because if you want to try one, try one. And then but for senior living, especially for our target demographic tends to be, your what we call the sandwich generation. So middle-aged adults who have young kids at home, they're very vigilant about safety, security. A lot of talk right now around accidental turn on of knobs, whether it's a pet or a kid. And then they're also buying this for their aging family members. And so when you buy this, especially for those safety reasons, most people want to be pretty comprehensive.
Akshita Iyer, thank you so much. Where can people find out more about your product? Is it at Ohm? No,
Ohmkitchen.com.
ohmkitchen.com. All right, everyone check it out and tell me what you think of it. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you so much, Mike.